Welcome to our series exploring the enigmatic realm of unexplained deaths and mysteries. Join us as we delve into perplexing cases that defy conventional understanding, where each clue raises more questions.
Hey, have you ever heard of the Yuba County 5? It's one of the most bizarre unsolved mysteries out there.
I think I've heard bits and pieces, but I don't know the full story. What happened?
It's a chilling case. It started back in February 1978 when 5 men from Yuba City, California just vanished. They were Jack Madruga, Ted Wyer, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. All of them had some level of intellectual or psychiatric challenges, but they were functional. That night they went to Chico to watch a college basketball game, and afterward, they just disappeared. Their families never saw them again.
That sounds unsettling. Did they all disappear at the same time?
Yeah, and what makes it so strange is that they were last seen leaving the basketball game together.
They even stopped at a convenience store for snacks on the way back, but instead of going home, they drove way off course, deep into the Plumas National Forest, a remote mountainous area. Their car was found a few days later, abandoned in the snow, about 70 miles from where they were supposed to be. The car was in working condition. It had gas, but there was no sign of the men.
That's really odd. Why would they drive into the mountains like that?
That's one of the biggest mysteries. The men weren't dressed for the cold, and it didn't make any sense for them to head into such a remote area. None of them had any real experience in the wilderness either. The area was snowed in, so investigators were baffled. It's like they intentionally drove out there, but why, we don't know. Months later, in June 1978, some of their bodies were discovered, and things got even weirder. Ted Wyer's body was found inside a Forest Service trailer about 19 miles from the car. He had apparently survived for weeks, but he died of starvation and exposure, despite there being food and heat sources inside the trailer. He'd even lost around 100 pounds, which is crazy because there were enough supplies there to keep him alive for a long time. His feet were frostbitten, and he was wrapped in several layers of sheets. It's like he was trying to keep warm but never thought to use the resources around him.
That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't he eat or use the heat?
Exactly. It's one of the most baffling parts of the case, and it doesn't end there. They found the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling about 11 miles away from the car, but their bodies had been out in the elements for months. They had likely succumbed to exposure soon after they left the car. Later, searchers found bones belonging to Jack Hewitt scattered not far from the trailer, but Gary Mathias, one of the group, was never found. He's the biggest mystery of all.
What do you mean? What was different about Gary?
Gary Mathias had a history of schizophrenia and needed medication to manage his condition. Unlike the others, he wasn't intellectually disabled, but he had psychiatric issues. There are theories that his condition might have played a role in what happened, but since his body was never found, no one knows what happened to him. Some even think he may have survived and wandered off somewhere. But without his medication, it's hard to say what state of mind he was in.
That's eerie, so no one has any real idea what happened to them.
There are theories, but nothing conclusive. Some people believe the group got lost and panicked in the storm that hit that night. Others speculate that they might have encountered someone or something that caused them to leave their car and head deeper into the mountains. Some even think foul play could have been involved, but there's no evidence to support it. The fact that they were found so far from the car, scattered over miles, only deepens the mystery. And why did Ted Wyer just waste away in a trailer stocked with food and fuel? None of it makes sense.
Wow, that's really disturbing. It sounds like something from a horror movie, but it's real life.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that's haunted people for decades. True crime fans still speculate about what might have happened. The Yuba County 5 remains one of the most chilling and confusing disappearances in American history. The lack of answers just makes it more unsettling.
I can see why. It's one of those mysteries that will probably never fully be solved, huh?
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. Even after all these years, it still leaves people scratching their heads.
Have you ever heard of the Great Boston Molasses Flood?
It sounds almost absurd, but it was a real disaster in 1919.
Molasses Flood. That does sound bizarre. How did it even happen?
It was this massive tank, holding about 2.3 million gallons of molasses in Boston's North End. The molasses was used to make industrial alcohol, which was in high demand during World War I. On January 15, 1919, the tank burst, sending a wave of molasses through the streets at around 35 miles per hour.
Wait, 35 miles per hour? That's faster than I imagined molasses could move. What was the aftermath like?
Oh, it was devastating. The flood killed 21 people, injured 150, and destroyed buildings and vehicles in its path. Rescue efforts were a nightmare because the molasses was so thick and sticky that it made everything more difficult. To make things worse, the molasses started hardening in the cold, slowing down the cleanup and making it even more challenging to pull people out.
That's horrifying. But why did the tank fail? Did no one see this coming? That's where it gets interesting. The exact cause is still debated, but there were clear signs that the tank was poorly constructed. The company that built it, United States Industrial Alcohol, USIA, rushed the job back in 1915. Apparently, the tank had been leaking from the start, and they only patched it up by painting it brown so the leaks wouldn't be so visible.
That sounds like criminal negligence. Was there an investigation?
Yes, and it revealed that the tank was structurally weak. They didn't even properly test the tank before filling it. Many believe the inferior quality of the steel and the lack of a qualified engineer during construction led to the disaster. But here's where the debate comes in. Some historians also think temperature changes played a role. You see, the temperature had suddenly warmed up that day, from freezing to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This could have caused the molasses to expand, building up pressure inside the already fragile tank.
So it could have been the temperature change combined with the structural flaws.
Exactly. It's likely a combination of factors. Another theory suggests that the molasses may have been fermenting, which would have produced gas, increasing the internal pressure even more. But in the end, the USIA was found responsible in court for the disaster, though they initially tried to blame anarchists, claiming sabotage. That was dismissed, of course. They ended up paying significant damages after a lengthy legal battle.
Anarchists? That's quite the reach. So did the disaster lead to any major changes in safety regulations?
Yes, it became a wake-up call for industrial safety and building regulations. The disaster highlighted how reckless corporate behavior and lax oversight could have catastrophic consequences. It's one of those early moments in US history where people realized the need for stricter regulations on construction and public safety, especially with industrial projects.
It's crazy to think how something as mundane as molasses could cause such a huge disaster. I bet the cleanup took forever.
It did. They were cleaning molasses off the streets for months. Even years later, on hot summer days, locals said they could still smell molasses in the neighborhood. It's become part of Boston's lore, equal parts tragedy and strange curiosity.
Have you ever heard of the Phaistos Disc? It's this really mysterious artifact from ancient Crete that no one has been able to fully understand.
The Phaistos Disc? No, I don't think I've heard of that. What's so mysterious about it?
It's a clay disc, about 15 centimeters in diameter, discovered in 1908 by an archaeologist named Luigi Pernier at the Minoan Palace of Phaistos on Crete. What makes it so intriguing is the spiral arrangement of symbols on both sides of the disc. 241 symbols in total, grouped into 61 sections. The symbols themselves are unlike anything else we've found from that time, or really from anywhere. They depict things like human figures, animals, plants, and some abstract shapes, but no one's been able to figure out exactly what they mean.
That sounds fascinating. So is it some kind of writing system? Why can't they decipher it?
That's the big question. Many scholars believe it could be a form of writing, but since there's no other example of these symbols anywhere, it's really hard to compare it to anything. Some think it could be a religious text, a legal document, or even a hymn. Others suggest it might be a calendar or some form of record keeping. But because we haven't found anything else like it and the symbols don't match any known script, like linear A or linear B, it's been impossible to crack.
So there's nothing similar to it from the Minoan period?
Nope, not really. That's what makes it such a puzzle.
It was created around 1700 BCE during the height of the Minoan civilization, but it doesn't resemble their known writing systems. What's also strange is how it was made.
The symbols were stamped into the clay using pre-formed seals, almost like an ancient form of movable type. This stamping method was unheard of in that period, making it one of the earliest known examples of that technique.
Wait, you're saying it was stamped, like early printing?
Exactly. It's kind of like an ancient version of printing. Each symbol was pressed into the clay individually using a stamp, suggesting that the symbols were part of a standardized system. That's why some people think it could have been used for mass production, or that the symbols were part of a broader system that we just haven't found other examples of. But there's no real evidence of other writing in this style from the Minoans, which only adds to the mystery.
Couldn't it be a forgery? I mean, it sounds almost too unique to be real.
That theory has come up before. Some skeptics believe it might be a modern forgery created around the time it was found. But most experts believe it's genuine, based on the context in which it was discovered and the fact that no solid evidence has emerged to prove it's fake. The craftsmanship, the symbols, and the fact that it was buried deep in the ruins of the palace all point to it being authentic.
So, what are some of the theories about its meaning? Anything convincing?
There are tons of theories. Some link it to Linear A, which was the script used by the Minoans, though that script is also undeciphered, so that doesn't get us very far. Others have tried connecting it to Linear B, the script used later by the Mycenaeans, but again, the symbols don't match up. There's even been speculation that it could represent some kind of foreign influence, that maybe the script came from a different culture, possibly one that we don't know about yet.
It's wild to think that after all this time, we still don't know what it says. Has anything like it been found elsewhere?
No, that's part of the problem. The Phaistos Disc is completely unique. No other examples of this script or style of writing have been found anywhere, not even in other Minoan sites. It's like this isolated artifact that doesn't fit into any known cultural or historical patterns. That's what makes it such an enduring mystery.
And we still haven't made any progress in deciphering it.
Not really. There have been attempts, but nothing definitive. Without more examples of the script or some sort of Rosetta Stone equivalent to help us understand the language, we're kind of stuck. Some scholars argue it might not even be a written language in the traditional sense. Maybe it's a symbolic system or a pictographic script. Others think it could have been used for a very specific purpose, like a ritual object or a ceremonial calendar. And that might be why we don't see more of it.
So, it's essentially this ancient puzzle that no one's been able to solve for over a century.
Exactly. It's one of those archaeological finds that just defies explanation. The Phaistos Disc has become this symbol of the lost mysteries of ancient civilizations. Every few years, someone comes up with a new theory, but nothing has fully explained it yet. It's a reminder of how much we still don't know about ancient cultures like the Minoans, and how some secrets may stay hidden forever.
Have you ever heard of the mystery surrounding the Ulfberht Viking Swords?
Oh yeah, I've heard a little about them. Weren't they some kind of legendary swords used by the Vikings?
Exactly. The Ulfberht swords are famous because they were far superior to other weapons of the time. We're talking about the 9th to 11th centuries here, and most swords back then were made from pretty basic iron. But the Ulfberht swords were made from something way more advanced, high-quality steel, almost like modern steel.
Wait, modern steel? I thought that kind of technology wasn't around back then.
That's what makes these swords so mysterious. The Vikings had access to a type of steel called crucible steel, which is much purer and stronger than what anyone else in Europe was using at the time. It's the kind of steel that can only be made by heating iron to extremely high temperatures, around 1,600 degrees Celsius, which would have been really hard to achieve with the technology in Northern Europe.
So how did the Vikings get their hands on this steel? Did they figure out some secret method for making it?
That's one of the big questions. Some historians think the Vikings may have traded for the steel with merchants from the Middle East or Central Asia. There was already a lot of trade going on back then, and places like Persia and India had been making high-quality crucible steel for centuries. Think Damascus steel, for example. It's possible the Vikings got their materials, or maybe even learned forging techniques through these trade networks.
So the swords could have been made using Middle Eastern steel. That's crazy to think about. Vikings using steel from places like Persia.
It is. But the name Ulfberht is also key here. It's stamped right into the blade, like a signature. The thing is, we're not sure if Ulfberht was the name of a person, a group of craftsmen, or maybe even a workshop.
So there's no record of who exactly made these swords?
Nope, and that's part of the mystery. Over 170 of these swords have been found all across Europe, and they weren't all made to the same high standards. Some are clear forgeries, people trying to copy the Ulfberht name to sell their swords for more money but using much lower quality iron. It's kind of like how counterfeit luxury goods work today.
That's wild. It must have been a big deal to own a real Ulfberht sword then.
Oh, for sure. These swords were a status symbol. In Viking society, a sword wasn't just a weapon, it was a sign of wealth and power. Only the richest and most powerful warriors could afford a real Ulfberht, so owning one would have been huge flex, so to speak.
And we still don't know how they made them or who was behind it all.
Right, despite all the studies and analyses over the years, the full story behind the Ulfberht swords remains unsolved. Some experts think there might have been a small number of European smiths who figured out how to make crucible steel, but that's still just a theory. The swords raise so many questions about trade, technology, and craftsmanship in the Viking Age, and we just don't have all the answers yet.
It's like a medieval mystery that we're still trying to crack. I love that. These swords are a perfect example of how advanced people could be, even back in the so-called Dark Ages.
Exactly, it just goes to show that history isn't always what we expect. The Ulfberht swords are a reminder that there were always people pushing the boundaries of what was possible, even in the most unexpected places.
Have you ever heard of the Knights of the Golden Circle treasure? It's one of those mysteries that's been around for over a century.
Yeah, vaguely. Something about a secret group hiding treasure after the Civil War, right? But I never really dug into it. What's the story behind it?
So, the Knights of the Golden Circle, or KGC, was actually a secret society that formed in the mid-1800s. Their main goal was to expand the southern states' influence, particularly through spreading slavery into new territories like Mexico and the Caribbean. As the Civil War broke out, the KGC got deeply involved in guerrilla tactics, espionage, and basically anything to help the Confederacy. But here's where it gets really interesting. The legend goes that they were also stockpiling a massive treasure.
Wait, treasure? How did they supposedly get this wealth?
Well, according to the story, they raised money from wealthy Southern sympathizers and amassed fortunes from looting during the war. Gold, silver, jewels, you name it. The idea was that they were going to use this treasure to fund a second uprising if the South lost the war. Some people believe that even after the Confederacy's defeat, the KGC went underground and continued protecting these hidden caches, waiting for the right time to try again.
So, where is all this treasure supposed to be? Did anyone ever find it?
That's the mystery. Over the years, there have been countless treasure hunters trying to find it. There are stories about coded maps, symbols on rocks, secret tunnels. It sounds like something out of an Indiana Jones movie. Some believe these hidden clues were left behind by KGC members to mark where the treasure was buried. In fact, some even think that famous outlaws like Jesse James were part of the KGC and helped hide the loot. Jesse James? That's wild. I thought he was just a bandit, not some secret society member.
Yeah, that's one of the more interesting parts of the legend. Jesse James was supposedly high up in the ranks of the KGC, and some say he hid treasure in various places across the country. There are even claims that he faked his death and lived on, guarding the treasure in secret. There's no concrete proof, but treasure hunters are convinced there's something to it. That's the thing. No one has ever found any definitive proof. There have been some people who claim to have discovered small caches or clues, but nothing that points to the massive hoard that the legend promises. Skeptics argue that the KGC was more about political power than stockpiling treasure, and they say there's no real historical evidence to suggest they hid a fortune, but the lack of proof doesn't stop people from looking.
Sounds like another one of those lost treasure myths that just refuses to die.
Some people really believe it's out there, though. There are even modern-day treasure hunters who devote their lives to deciphering the clues, checking out old KGC meeting spots, or exploring caves in remote areas. Whether it's real or not, the story is captivating enough to keep the search going after all these years.
I can see why people are fascinated. I mean, who wouldn't want to stumble across a hidden treasure chest full of gold?
Even if it's all just a myth, the KGC treasure has become part of the fabric of American folklore. The idea that there could be massive caches of Confederate gold hidden away, waiting to be found, is enough to keep treasure hunters intrigued and digging, literally, for the truth. Have you ever heard about the Franklin expedition? It's one of the most mysterious stories in the history of Arctic exploration.
Yeah, wasn't it that British expedition where they were trying to find the Northwest Passage, but all the ships and crew just disappeared, right?
Exactly. It was led by Sir John Franklin in 1845. They took 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, with 129 men in total. Their goal was to discover a sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic. These ships were pretty advanced for their time. They had reinforced hulls to deal with the ice and even steam engines. Plus, they carried enough provisions to last a few years. But despite all that, none of the crew survived.
That's insane. So what happened? Did they just vanish or were there any clues?
It took years before anyone found anything. At first, when they didn't return, search expeditions were sent out. Eventually, there were some Inuit accounts that helped. They talked about seeing white men dragging boats over the ice, clearly suffering from starvation. Then British expeditions started finding scattered relics. A note dated April 1848, for example, which revealed that Franklin had died in June 1847. The remaining crew had abandoned the ships to try and walk south.
So they abandoned the ships? Was it because they were trapped in the ice?
Most likely. The Arctic ice is brutal and it's believed the ships got locked in it, but the real mystery is what exactly happened after they abandoned ship. The note said 24 men had already died by the time they left the ships. Later, investigators found graves, remains of other crew members, and even some personal belongings scattered over the harsh landscape.
I've read that lead poisoning was involved. Wasn't that from the food they carried?
Yeah, that's a big theory. They had these canned provisions, and the solder used to seal the tins might have been contaminated with lead. When scientists examined some of the remains, they found incredibly high levels of lead in their bones. It would have affected their mental and physical health, confusion, fatigue, even madness. On top of that, they were suffering from scurvy and starvation, and the evidence suggests it got so desperate that they resorted to cannibalism.
Lead poisoning, scurvy, cannibalism. It sounds like everything that could go wrong did. But what about the ships themselves?
That's the crazy part. For over 160 years, the ships were missing. Then, in 2014, underwater archaeologists found the wreck of HMS Erebus in shallow water near King William Island. 2 years later, in 2016, they found HMS Terror, almost perfectly preserved at the bottom of an Arctic bay. These discoveries were huge. They gave us a lot more information about what happened, but they also raised new questions. Why were the ships where they were found? Did the crew return to the ships after abandoning them? There are still a lot of pieces missing.
It's wild how long the mystery lasted. Even with modern technology, it took that long to find the ships. But with all that we know now, are there still unsolved parts of the story?
Definitely. We still don't know exactly how many men made it after abandoning the ships or what their final days were like. There are gaps in the timeline, and while we have some insight from the Inuit accounts and the artifacts, there's still a lot we don't fully understand. The wrecks might hold more clues, but the Arctic is so harsh that exploring them is a slow process.
It's such a tragic story, especially with how close they might have been to surviving. It really shows just how dangerous those early polar explorations were.
Yeah, it's a reminder of the limits of human endurance, even with all the technology they had at the time. The Franklin expedition is a mix of incredible ambition and terrible disaster. It still fascinates historians and adventurers today.
Hey, have you ever heard of the vanishing village of Anjikuni in Canada? It's one of the creepiest unsolved mysteries out there.
The Vanishing Village? No, I haven't. What happened there?
So, back in the 1930s, there was this small Inuit village near Lake Anjikuni in northern Canada. One day, the entire population, men, women, children, just vanished without a trace, completely gone, and no one has been able to explain what happened to them.
Wait, the entire village? That sounds wild. How did people find out?
It all started with a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle. He was traveling through the area in November 1930 and decided to stop at the village, as he had done before. When he arrived, everything was silent. The place was eerily quiet. No people, no movement. He checked inside the huts, and he found half-eaten meals still on the tables and food cooking over the fires, as if everyone had just left suddenly. All their belongings, even their rifles, were left behind.
Rifles? In a remote area like that? No one would leave their weapons behind unless something major happened. So did anyone ever figure out where they went?
That's the thing, no one knows. LaBelle was so freaked out by what he saw that he went to the nearest RCMP post to report it. There's even more to the story. Supposedly, LaBelle found the village's sled dogs dead, starved to death, still tied to their posts, and some versions say that even the graves in the village's cemetery had been dug up with the bodies missing. And to top it all off, strange lights were reported in the sky around the time the village disappeared.
Wait, lights in the sky? Are we talking UFOs or something?
Some people think so. The lights have fueled speculation that maybe the villagers were taken by extraterrestrials. It's one of the theories, though it's a bit out there. Others suggest it could have been something like a natural disaster. Maybe they fled because of some environmental threat. But that doesn't explain why they left everything behind so suddenly. What about the RCMP? Did they ever find anything?
That's the weird part. The RCMP supposedly investigated but never found any sign of the villagers. Some people claim they never even made an official report. The police later dismissed the story, saying it's just an urban legend, and they insist there was no investigation or missing village at all. But there's no denying that LaBelle's story and the mystery around it has been passed down for years.
It sounds like one of those stories that gets bigger and weirder every time it's told, but still, if it's true, that's pretty chilling. It reminds me of the Roanoke colony in the US, where people just disappeared without a trace too.
Exactly. It has the same kind of unsettling vibe, and some of the details in this story make it feel like a supernatural thriller. The abandoned village, missing bodies from graves, and those mysterious lights in the sky. I think that's why it's stuck around for so long in Canadian folklore. It's a mystery that just refuses to be solved.
So you don't think it's real? Like, it's just an old legend?
Hard to say. Skeptics have pointed out that there are no official records of an investigation, and some think it might have been an exaggeration by journalists looking for a spooky story. It could be a case of something getting blown way out of proportion. But then again, if you think about how remote and harsh that area is, it's not impossible that something strange happened. In that kind of wilderness, anything could go wrong, and no one would know.
True, the Arctic is pretty unforgiving. Maybe the truth is somewhere between an exaggerated tale and something genuinely bizarre. Either way, it's kind of cool how these unsolved mysteries keep people guessing, even decades later.
Totally. Whether it's real or just folklore, the vanishing village of Anjikuni taps into that fear of the unknown. What could cause an entire community to just disappear, leaving everything behind? It's the kind of mystery that sticks with you.
Hey, have you ever heard of the Dancing Forest in Kaliningrad?
The Dancing Forest? No, I haven't. What's that about?
Oh, it's this really unique place in Russia, specifically on the Curonian Spit, which is this long strip of land between the Baltic Sea and the Curonian Lagoon. The forest is famous because its pine trees grow in these super weird, twisted shapes. The trunks aren't straight like normal trees. They curve, spiral, and even make loops in some spots. That's why they call it the Dancing Forest.
That sounds pretty bizarre. Why do the trees grow like that? Is there a specific reason?
That's the interesting part. No one really knows for sure. There are a few theories, though. Some scientists think it has to do with a combination of natural factors like the wind, the soil, and the shifting sand dunes. Others have a more unusual theory, suggesting that maybe some kind of caterpillar damaged the trees as they were growing, affecting their shape.
Caterpillars? That's a new one. But wait, Don't people say that geomagnetic forces could be involved too?
Exactly, that's another popular theory. Some think there's something strange about the Earth's magnetic fields in that area, which could have affected how the trees grew. But honestly, none of these ideas have been fully proven. It's one of those natural mysteries that keeps people guessing.
Wow, so there's no definitive explanation yet. That's really cool. I bet it's given rise to a lot of legends, right?
Oh yeah, there's a ton of folklore surrounding the forest. One of the most well-known stories is that the trees are enchanted, shaped by some kind of mystical energy. People say that if you walk through the forest and make a wish, it might come true because of the forest's magical powers. Some even believe the spiraling trees symbolize some kind of spiritual transformation or represent Earth's energy in a visual form.
That's wild! It sounds like the forest is almost otherworldly. Is it really old? Like, has it been there for centuries?
Actually, no, it's relatively recent. The forest was planted in the 1960s as part of a conservation project. The Curonian Spit is a fragile environment, and the trees were planted to help stabilize the shifting sand dunes. It's part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site now because the whole area is ecologically significant. So it's not just about the trees, but the whole environment around it, huh?
Exactly. The Curonian Spit itself is an incredible place. It's home to a ton of wildlife, including some rare bird species. Nature lovers go there not only to see the dancing forest, but also to experience the whole landscape. The dunes, the lagoon, the forests. The forest is just one piece of this beautiful and mysterious area.
Sounds like a place I'd love to visit someday. It's rare to find a spot that mixes both natural mystery and beauty like that.
Definitely. The dancing forest is such a unique mix of science, nature, and legend all wrapped into one. You can't help but feel like there's something magical about it when you're walking through those twisted trees.
Hey, have you heard about the Death Valley Germans? It's such a tragic and eerie disappearance.
No, I haven't. What happened?
It's a case from 1996 where 4 German tourists vanished while exploring Death Valley. There was a couple, Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer, and they had Rimkus's 10-year-old son, Georg, and Cornelia's 4-year-old son, Max, with them. They were on a road trip through California, just enjoying the sights.
That sounds like a great trip, but what went wrong?
Well, they were in a rented minivan, and they decided to take a detour into some remote parts of the park. You know how big and barren Death Valley is? It's one of the harshest environments in the US. Temperatures can soar above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's barely any water. Anyway, they apparently underestimated the dangers of the desert.
That doesn't sound good. Where did they end up?
They drove into a really remote area near Anvil Spring Canyon. Months later, in October 1996, a park ranger found their minivan stuck in sand. It had 3 flat tires, was out of gas, and had a lot of personal belongings still inside, souvenirs, maps, even food wrappers, but no sign of the tourists.
So they just abandoned the van and disappeared?
Yeah, exactly. It triggered a huge search, but nothing turned up for years. It's like they vanished into thin air. People were baffled by how no trace of them could be found in such an open area. But Death Valley is deceptively vast, with some parts being incredibly remote and rugged.
I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for them. Did they ever find out what happened?
Not until 2009. That's when 2 hikers discovered human remains in the same area where the van had been found. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Egbert and his son Georg, but they didn't find anything from Cornelia or Max. The authorities believe they all likely died from exposure and dehydration. Death Valley can be absolutely unforgiving, especially if you don't have enough water or you're lost.
It's still a mystery. Some speculate they were just curious and wanted to explore the more remote parts of the park, not realizing how dangerous it could be. Maybe they were following an outdated or inaccurate map, or they got lost and tried to walk to safety after the van got stuck. But with temperatures soaring, even a short walk in that heat could be fatal without enough water.
I guess it shows how important it is to be prepared, especially in places like that. It's crazy to think that they disappeared for over a decade without anyone finding them.
Exactly. The desert can swallow people up, and no one ever knows. Their story is one of the most haunting disappearances in Death Valley's history, a chilling reminder of how dangerous nature can be when we're unprepared or underestimate it.
It's scary to think about. You hear about stuff like that happening, but when it's real people, it hits differently.
Yeah, it really does. They were just ordinary tourists looking for adventure, but Death Valley can turn deadly fast.
Have you ever heard about the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery? It's one of those unsolved cases that really creeps me out.
Yeah, I've heard bits and pieces about it. Isn't that the one where 3 lighthouse keepers just disappeared without a trace? What exactly happened?
Exactly.
It happened in December 1900. The Flannan Isles are these remote rocky islands in Scotland, and the lighthouse on Eileen Moor was supposed to be manned by 3 keepers, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall and Donald MacArthur. But when a relief vessel came to check on them on December 26th, no one was there. The whole place was abandoned. It was like they'd just vanished.
Vanished? That's weird. What did the relief crew find when they got there?
That's the strangest part. The lighthouse was in an eerie state. The clocks had stopped, the fire had burned out, and there was an uneaten meal just sitting on the table. It was like they'd left in a hurry, but without any signs of a struggle. It was like time had frozen and they just disappeared into thin air.
So, no signs of violence or anything like that?
No, nothing like that.
But when they checked the logbook, it got even stranger. The last entries were made in the days leading up to their disappearance, and they talked about a terrible storm battering the island. Marshall, the second in command, wrote that the storm was the worst he'd seen in 20 years, and he noted that all 3 men were praying for their safety, which was odd since MacArthur was apparently not the religious type. But here's the kicker. No other ships in the area reported a storm at that time.
Wait, so they were describing a storm that didn't actually happen?
Yep, at least not according to weather records. The mystery deepens there.
One theory is that a massive rogue wave or a series of huge waves swept them off the island while they were outside trying to secure things during a real storm. When the investigators looked at the west landing area, they found signs of damage as if something powerful had hit the shore.
But all 3 of them would have been outside at the same time. That's against protocol, right?
Exactly. One of them should have stayed inside. But maybe they were all trying to deal with some emergency, like equipment getting damaged and they didn't have time to think about protocol. There's a story that suggests MacArthur might have been caught in something dangerous outside. And the others ran out to save him, and then a wave took them all.
That could explain it, but it still feels off, doesn't it? Like, no bodies were ever found.
None, not a trace. Some people believe that the waves took them far out to sea, so their bodies just never washed up. But you're right, there's still this unsettling sense that something's missing in the story. Some people have suggested more far-fetched explanations. Like MacArthur, who was known to be hot-tempered, might have snapped and killed the others, then either fell or threw himself into the sea. But again, no real evidence supports that.
I've heard people even talk about supernatural explanations. You know, like ghost ships or sea creatures or even something otherworldly. I guess the isolation of the island kind of fuels that imagination.
Oh, absolutely. The remoteness of the Flannan Isles has definitely added to the eerie nature of the case. Some theories involve supernatural forces, like the idea that the men were taken by some kind of sea spirit or ghostly force. The fact that the lighthouse keepers lived in total isolation on this barren, stormy island kind of lends itself to those sorts of legends, but obviously none of that can be proven.
It's so eerie.
And the fact that this happened over 100 years ago, and we still have no solid answers, I guess that's part of what keeps people talking about it.
Exactly. It's one of those mysteries where, no matter how many plausible theories are thrown out there, nothing quite fits perfectly. The combination of the strange weather reports, the abandoned lighthouse, and the complete lack of physical evidence leaves so much room for speculation. And that's probably why it remains one of the most famous maritime mysteries to this day.
It's like one of those stories that just keeps you wondering. A real-life mystery with no satisfying ending.
And that's exactly why the disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers continues to fascinate people even now. There's just something deeply unsettling about the idea that these men vanished into thin air, leaving only a few cryptic clues behind.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the unexplained. We hope these mysteries have sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to delve deeper into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop seeking the truth.